Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Future of Care chat with the virtual health team. We're having another discussion with our experts on interoperability and FHIR compatibility. Today, we've got Marcus Caraballo, our VP of Product, and Huthaifa Khan, our Director of Solutions Architecture, back to talk with us specifically about FHIR and sort of the promise and reality of FHIR data standardization as it relates to healthcare data interoperability. So today, we're really going to talk about a few pieces. First and foremost, what it is and why it matters. Secondly, why now and why a lot of payers in the industry are moving in that direction. And then, what are the benefits and some of the drawbacks, and how do we balance those when we're working through virtual health client solutions? So first and foremost, we're gonna talk about what FHIR is, and for that, I'm gonna hand it off to Khan first to kind of give us a little overview.
Oh, good to be back. Last week, on the last episode, we spoke about a number of standards that have been used across the healthcare industry, HL7v2, FHIR being the other one. There's also other formats such as X12 that have been used historically across the healthcare industry. So FHIR, which stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, is a new standard that has really been around for a while, but has only recently seen much more of a surfacing in the healthcare tech industry. So FHIR is more than just a data standard, and I think that that's really, really important to understand. It's not just about what your data schema looks like. While that is a immensely important part of the standard, the surrounding aspects of the standard to that data structure are really what make it far and above better than the standards that we've seen before. So FHIR not just has the structures, but it also has an API framework around that. It allows you to define how you want to search for data that's standardized across different systems, so you're not dealing with different query languages or different APIs. It also allows you to dictate what data you're getting back, so that you're not just pulling everything that you need. So FHIR is broken down into what we call resources. So, for example, a patient resource, which is one of the most central in the FHIR standard, is really about all of the different demographic data related to that particular patient, right? So it's not going to deal with like your coverage or health plan data. It's not going to deal with your episodes or encounters or visits. It's purely just your demographic record that very clearly identifies your contact information, your demographic information, that kind of thing. Basically, the form that you first fill out when you go into a doctor or to a clinic. And then around that, you have a number of other resources such as coverage, you have encounter, you have the diagnostic reports and observation results. And these often mirror a lot of the different HL7v2 types that we used to see. But basically, they allow for the communication of information relative to specific events. So now when you send a observation result to a FHIR server, you don't need to include all of the patient information as well. You just have a reference to the patient that you're talking about, and that's it, right? So this allows for very easy interoperability across different systems, especially ones that you're pretty regularly integrated with. It saves a lot on speed, efficiency, and reliability when it's architected in that particular fashion. One thing I do want to point out, and I think is super, super important to understand, is that FHIR is an international standard. Its base standard is kind of across the world. It's used in different healthcare organizations across the globe, but it's flexible enough that it allows specific jurisdictions and specific areas to really enforce their own level of standard on top of that. So I touched on that briefly in the last episode in terms of implementation guides. And if we think about it in the realm of the US, the FHIR standard is really the federal standard, if you think about it that way. Whereas the implementation guides are the standards that you put on top of those, per state. Right. So a good example of this is the US core standard, which is built on top of the standard FHIR resources that allow for the additional information that is relevant to the US market. right? The data points and the code sets that are used internally within the US that might not necessarily be applicable elsewhere. You can use implementation guides to make sure that your data is conforming to that particular set of relevant information across your different systems. Another really big aspect of FHIR is that you can always speak to it regardless of the system that you're going to, right? So if your particular system has a proprietary data schema, you can use FHIR to transfer that to another system without having to integrate your schema into theirs. Now, that doesn't really seem like much of an efficiency, but when you think about a central system that's coordinating and talking with a whole bunch of other systems, rather than now having to match your schema to each individual one, you can map your schema to the specific or relevant FHIR resources that you're talking about. And every single one of those systems, provided they're compatible with FHIR, will understand exactly what you're talking about and where to look for certain pieces of information. So it really has, in my opinion, from an interoperability professional perspective, it really has revolutionized the way that we think about it, right? That effectively, alongside the APIs and its data structures, can act as a backend to any front-end application that you want. Right? You can take a FHIR server that has all of your relevant data and build a completely new front-end application on top of it. And then you can take that same database and switch it to another, because the query standard, like I spoke about before, the APIs and the query standards that are used for it are the same. And they're easy to understand, they're standardized, they're normalized. And in my opinion, has really, really made a immensely positive impact, not just to the reliability and integrity of the information being transferred between systems, but also the efficiency with which you can do it and the innovation that you can do alongside that particular data standard. There's a whole bunch of other things inside FHIR that we can talk about, but for now, I'll hold off on diving too deep.
I learned a bunch that I didn't know. Marcus, do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, I think, over the years, right, across our customer base in the market, you have a number, as I'm sure folks are aware, right? Yeah, you oftentimes have to have a number of different systems with siloed data to be able to facilitate operational workflows, bidirectional communications, regulatory needs, right? All these organizations have to be able to communicate data frictionlessly across typically a number of different systems. In the earlier days of me being in the space, it really looked like each of those pipelines that were needed had to be kind of custom built data feeds, right? In some cases, you had some standardization, but a lot of the times, right, you have an engineer who's building a feed that's going to work for that one particular integration point and won't necessarily work for other integration points. So ultimately, really, I think it's revolutionized our ability to create leverage with the kind of data work that we do as it relates to interoperability across disparate systems. And this is every organization, right? There's kind of a level of confidence that you can get that, okay, when we build these pipelines, right, they're not necessarily just going to meet the needs of this specific, system that we have to integrate with. Really, we're kind of setting the foundation to be able to integrate with other systems as well. So just that kind of innovation in the space over the past, say, decade is a big deal because at the end of the day, what does it do? It just allows all of the different systems that operate within the space to be able to communicate more frictionlessly, to be able to kind of support these organizations having models of care that, maybe historically maybe they were possible, but were they feasible, from a fiscal or timeline standpoint? Probably not, right? So there's just a complete kind of new perspective on innovation and from an ecosystem standpoint, right? Different, a different way that all of us can now collaborate with one another.
Makes sense to me. And I like the point about leverage and scalability, right? As we think about how do we get more efficient at moving data around in the healthcare system, the repeatability of some of these, right, has to be critical in terms of organizations' ability to scale. I think that's a good segue into our next topic.